Welcome back. As we talk about a future for Michigan that is equitable and vibrant, it's important to examine the foundation of our lives, our homes. Michigan has been faced with an affordable housing crisis for years, and until we are able to emerge from this crisis, we cannot expect to thrive as a state. Today, our panel will explore the critical role that housing plays in our lives. And we're very fortunate to have Alicia Mazzara here to moderate our panel. Alicia is the Deputy Director for Housing Equity and Data Analysis at the National Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Her team works to protect and expand access to affordable housing for people with low incomes. Alicia evaluates the degree to which federal rental assistance programs assist underserved populations, particularly people of color, and to what extent people receiving rental assistance are segregated into communities that have historically experienced underinvestment. Thank you for being here today, Alicia, and for moderating our panel.
Thank you, Karen, for that introduction and for having me here today. So we're going to talk about affordable housing in Michigan today, and I am joined by three experts who work every day to make Michigan communities stronger. I'm joined by Terri, who is a mom and an advocate who works on issues related to homelessness, domestic violence, mental health, and child abuse. She sees advocacy as a way to pay back with personal elbow grease for all the support she's received to gain stable housing after struggling with homelessness. We're also joined by Jim Schaafsma, who's a housing attorney with the Michigan Poverty Law Program, where he works on a range of different housing issues, including federally subsidized housing programs. And finally, Ruth Johnson, the Public Policy Director at Community Development Associates of Detroit, will be joining us. She is also a teacher at Wayne State University Law School, where she focuses on accessible and affordable housing. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to us. I've given you all very brief introductions, but I would love to go around and have each of you maybe take 2 minutes to tell us a little bit more about your work and what you do. And also, we just had that great keynote. So if there's anything like on your mind, any reactions you have to that, I welcome that as well. So we'll start with Terri, and then we'll go to Jim and then Ruth, and we'll kind of repeat that cycle throughout all the questions. So Terri, why don't you kick us off?
My name is Terri, and I am basically in the Southeast Michigan area. I'm going to say the theme of the event being just in time. I feel like my nephew has his ears ringing somewhere because he's always saying that that's him, just in time or just in case, whichever one. But I was asked why I was still being an advocate sitting as a survivor on the COC, which is the continuum of care in my county, and after so many years. And I told her, I said that it was basically because nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. It's still the same. You still have to do agency time and so on and so forth. So I'm going to stay an advocate and be an advocate and still be rock on about the whole thing. So thank you.
Thanks, Terri. Jim, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll be glad to. Thanks, Alicia, and thanks for joining us today. Thanks to the League for this invitation, and I look forward to our conversation today. So I'm the housing attorney at the Michigan Poverty Law Program. The Poverty Law Program tries to support the work of legal advocates for Michigan's low-income residents, and we do that. We try to do that in a variety of ways, do a lot of consultation, primarily with legal aid attorneys, but with a number of other constituencies too. And then we do a lot of direct advocacy too, legislative advocacy, administrative advocacy. So I do a lot of work with MISHDA, with the governor's office over the course of the pandemic with the Michigan Supreme Court. And I'll talk a bit about that work. And then, assortment of other stuff, trainings and publications work as well. So, glad that we can engage this really critical and pressing issue of improving housing opportunities for low-income families in Michigan.
Ruth, you want to go next?
Sure, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Ruth Johnson, and I am not the former Secretary of State, so don't get it twisted. I serve as the Public Policy Director at Community Development Advocates of Detroit, which we affectionately call CDAD. We are a membership-oriented, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization based in the city of Detroit. We have over 200 members across the great city of Detroit. They range from block clubs, neighborhood associations, community development organizations, community development finance institutions, individuals. And what we have in common is they have a place-based nexus with the city of Detroit, although they may have a larger service or target area than the city of Detroit. But we work around affordable and accessible housing, community benefits, land use, effective community engagement, and much, much more. And I just wanted to reflect on something I heard Taifa say about power. One of my basic principles and premises is that we are born with power. It's not that we have to get power. God gives us power. And babies are some of the most powerful advocates I know, because they will advocate for a diaper change or for food very loudly and effectively. But what happens is that sometimes there are barriers, whether they're emotional, psychological, legal, political, or just practical barriers for our free exercise, use, mobilization of that power.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ruth. Yeah, that's such an important reminder. Sometimes we are our barrier, right? Sometimes there are other things, but it's important to remember that. So today we're going to be talking about strengthening Michigan communities. And I think before we can really get into that, we need to figure out what it is we mean when we say a strong community. So Terri, to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about what your vision is of a strong community, and in particular, what do survivors like you need to be able to build community and thrive in a community?
I would like for you to say thank you for saying that it's surviving and not lived experience, because I have yet to get paid for my homelessness as a job. So thank you. That's an important distinction. I think that there needs to be real hope and trust put into the first steps of creating a stronger community. It's hard, as someone who has gone through homelessness for over 15 years, just shy of a little over 15 years, that it's hard to have hope because you're not feeling like you're having that trust on the other side of the table for people who are offering services. And then there's also a lot of separation of people who are staying in the shelters and gathering in homeless areas where the population will like hang out under the bridge or have their own little tent city, so on and so forth. Not being able to allow us to have that congregation ability and make it so that we can communicate with one another to meet our own needs. We all know when, as a community, we meet needs. That's how needs are met. That's how needs are addressed also, is within community. So if we are able to make it so that consumers who are in that struggle can gather and not be prevented from that gathering, we can build a stronger community in that, instead of being labeled as loitering, or that, you know, we're conspiring on how we're going to take over the world or whatever it might be, because I have yet to get my crown from the leading the world in that. But it is an inevitable thing. It is an inevitable thing that we will gather, and that we will gather for strength and addressing our needs. So I think once the needs have been able to be addressed and allowing an open communication for all parties involved, that trust is in the community. You need to have the trust to have community, which will eventually lead to real hope and not false hopes. I appreciate the question too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Terri. Yeah, I mean, what is community without people, right? Jim, if you could tell us a little bit about, you know, what strong community means to you, and particularly how does that measure up to the current landscape of affordable housing in Michigan today?
Yes. So in housing terms, my vision of a strong community, a strong state is one where every household can have safe, decent, and affordable, or at least near affordable housing in a place of their own choosing. And sadly, as I am confident most of you know, we don't have that in Michigan because of an increasingly severe lack of affordable housing and a long history of deeply rooted housing segregation by race and income. As the Michigan Housing Needs Summary that the National Low Income Housing Coalition has prepared shows, and so Laura, maybe if you could share that screen. The housing market, and let me just quickly add that the NLIHC and Alicia's organization, the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, do really exceptional job at compiling data and then presenting it in very clear and understandable and compelling ways. So it's really great that Alicia is here with us today. But our housing market is broken and dysfunctional, and the numbers in the housing profile have only gone up. The shortage of rental homes is affordable, especially for extremely low income families, that has only gone up, that the annual household income needed has gone up, and that's in part because of a change in HUD's fair market rent, which is mostly a good thing, and maybe I'll have a chance to talk about that a bit in the future. But this most, I think, troubling statistic is this last one, the 71%, meaning that more than 3/4 of households in the lowest income category, extremely low income, pay more than 50% of their income towards rent and utilities. And as probably the standard measure of housing affordability is housing costs, so rent plus utilities that consume 30% or less of a family's income. So that severe cost burden is very difficult, if not impossible, to sustain. I often hear from people, even including legislatures, why don't these tenants just pay their rent? Why are they avoiding paying their rent? Well, it's because there's this huge mismatch between income and housing costs. These cost burdens are so extreme, and these households' financial situation is so fragile that it makes housing stability very difficult to both get and to maintain. And then the NLIHC also has another study. It's called its Out of Reach study, and it uses this device called the housing wage to demonstrate how unattainable affordable housing can be for low-income families. And again, these are recent numbers, but because of some positive changes in the fair market rent, this number is only higher statewide, and it's much higher in some of the higher housing cost communities in Michigan. So, I mean, what this data demonstrates is, in a different way, is that severe cost burden that threatens and afflicts so many families and makes them vulnerable in so many ways. And so, what we see in Michigan, and it's not unique to Michigan, but across the state, across the country rather, is that the supply of what's sometimes called naturally occurring affordable housing, so market rate housing that is affordable, is shrinking, including in rural areas. And for a long time, at least in my decades now long experience of working as a housing advocate, that in rural areas, there was more of this naturally occurring affordable housing, and we're seeing that less and less. And just drawing on Ms. Butler's comment, she talked about the oligarchical dynamics of our economy, and that's one of the factors I think that affects, and it has for a long time, that this lack of naturally occurring affordable housing is that what we're seeing, it's been around for a long time, but I think it's intensifying, is the presence of what's called private investors, private equity investors. So these entities from Wall Street or other citadels of economic power that are using that power to make it much more difficult for Michigan and families across the U.S. to have affordable housing. And so now one of the few ways that families can get affordable or near affordable housing is through a federal housing assistance program. But the subsidy programs, fall far short of meeting demand, that fewer than 1 in 4 families who are eligible for some type of housing assistance get it, and we're losing more affordable units than new units are being developed. And so we have this huge and growing housing supply problem. And as many have been saying, and there's even a book on this subject, that homelessness and eviction are at their roots housing problems, housing supply problems. We've had and I don't know if I'm taking too long here, Alicia, if we want to move on or not. Was maybe just going to talk for a minute or two about our emergency rental assistance program. But if we need to move on, that's fine.
Why don't we have you talk more about that in the next question? I think that will fit in nicely, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, but thank you. I mean, like you said, the numbers on all of this, it's just eye-popping in Michigan and in so many other places around the country. Ruth, I want to give you a chance to also share your vision of a strong community, and also tell us a little bit about how community members can actually be involved in the decisions that actually shape where they live.
Yes. What I really like about this question is that each one of us who are participating in this public policy forum could probably answer this question, because each of us have a vision for a strong community. Whether you're in a geographic community that is considered urban, suburban, rural, whether you are part of a community of interest or affiliation around early childhood or public health or housing. But I think what's really important for public policy advocacy purposes is to have a shared vision of a stronger community based upon a group of community stakeholders, advocacy goals or strategies or priorities. And it could be around a lot of different things: homeowners, homeownership, renters, tenants, landlords. It could be around service providers and making sure services are adequately funded, around organizers and organizations. But I would also want to add, and this is maybe my realistic optimism in play, I would like to rephrase that question. Our communities are strong. We want is for them to be stronger and more powerful in the exercise of their collective power. So if I may answer my personal professional vision for a stronger community starts with strong, well-resourced individuals and families. That is the building block of a stronger community. And with that, not only are the individual and community basic needs need to be met, but also there needs to be strategies to ensure that all members of the community, regardless where they live or how they choose to live, have safe, accessible, and affordable, truly affordable housing, utilities, transportation, food, safe water, safe air, all of that. So I'm not saying that if you don't have that, you can't be an effective advocate. What I'm saying is it makes it more difficult to really exercise your power. But also we need strong community faith-based organizations, strong businesses, strong leadership. And when I think about community development, I'm not just talking about the physical development, but really the human development is as important, or maybe more important. A lot of this, whether we're talking about strong communities or the components of strong or stronger communities, is making sure there are sustainable resources, services, and supports. It shouldn't be the winds of politics, policies, or politicians that, there today, gone tomorrow, or never there. And when we're talking about housing policies, really, we have not had a comprehensive, well-resourced, ongoing housing policy that meets the needs of Michiganders. But I also think part of a stronger, thriving community is one that respects, values, and engages all community stakeholders, really appreciating their views, their voices, their expertise, their experience, and their wisdom. And I am going to push back what the keynote speaker said, having an equal voice. I don't want an equal voice. I want some voices to be more equal. Those that are directly impacted by those policies, those voices should have a special place in the public policy making process. So in terms of an example of that, here at CDAD, we're part of many coalitions because we understand group power, collective power. And we're proud to be a member of the Detroit Right to Counsel Coalition. And recently we worked with community members, tenants, landlords, organizers, grassroots organizations, city council members to pass the first Right to Counsel ordinance in the state of Michigan. But we're just part of a national movement. One of the things we do is, build power with national, state, and local organizations that are doing similar work. And that's how we formed our coalition. But one of the key things is that we ensured that a certain percentage of coalition members, especially in our core group, our steering committee, are tenants. That was intentional, that was purposeful. And not just like, oh yeah, you can come to the meeting, but providing the support they need. So when we had a call to action to come down to city council, we ensure that people had rides, or if people were driving, we provide stipends for parking. We assist people, support people, and love people where they are and what they need to be effective, powerful, and strong community stakeholders.
Can I add on top of that for just one moment? I love everything that you guys have been saying, and I appreciate it as being the person that's on the other side of the table that needs those things. So thank you. When I was born 20 years ago, I was asked to be on a committee. I thought, as sitting as a survivor, of course, I thought that I should not be saying anything inside this meeting because these were all the executive directors of programs that were helping me and my children at the time. And when I learned that I could have a voice and that I should use it, I never stopped. Didn't stop at all, which is part of the reason why Rock On became such a big thing, because if I thought it was going right, I would say rock on. And they thought that it was just me being stuck in the 80s, even though I wasn't born in the 80s. But but that having that voice, I knew I was only one of maybe 5 survivors that was sitting on a COC. And it's still disturbing because I still feel like my voice doesn't have enough strength or backing behind it because it's just me half the time going to meetings or going into legislation stuff and so on and so forth. It's hard and it's important. Yes, I think that as a survivor, my voice should be stronger than the executive directors that are coming around and making decisions for me and for my family and for my friends and everybody else. I feel that our voices are very important. We need to start having more survivors coming into committees and being able to share our stories so that we can understand where the downfalls are and what's working really good, and keep that one up. Thank you.
Thank you, Terri. I don't know, Ruth or Jim, if you want to add on to that, or I can keep us going, but I want to make an opening for that.
I would say ditto what Rock On Terri said, but I would expand. You have to be intentional and strategic, meaning some Right to Counsel community coalitions in other cities, they had a separate lawyers group and a community group. We purposely decided to keep everyone together, but we also understood people had different access to knowledge and information and experience. So we spent the time to make sure those who wanted to could understand how the legislative process works for the Right to Counsel Coalition on the city level, how to prepare public comment. But it also went to making key strategic decisions were made. So it's not just come in and turn on the mic and tell your story. That is important. But we regularly do about every 6 months a retreat where we bring people together, but we also go into the community. We don't ask community members always to come to a 2 p.m. or a 4 p.m. Zoom meeting when they're at work or taking care of family members or just living their lives. We go to where they are. We have street teams. We have people who go to the laundromat, the hairdresser, the barber shop, and we'll talk right to council anywhere, anytime, in a way that people can receive it. And we use all the creative arts, music, puppetry, and lots of other ways to communicate and engage.
Yeah, and I would just quickly add that I agree, that it's essential that the people are most affected by policy and potential policy changes be involved in the advocacy. And, I can say, and I've been too often a part of it, that's too often not the case, that those voices, aren't included, and it can be too easy to overlook them. And from advocates, including myself, thinking that, well, maybe some of these people don't understand the full complexity of these issues. And I think that I probably know what's best for them. And that's a really dangerous attitude and approach to take. And I've seen the detriments of that approach. So, I think, especially for people like me, white guys, that, we need to be a lot more attentive and a lot more, willing to share that power or some of that hope for power. So, I stand convicted of that, and I'm a work in progress on that score. And there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you both. I think we're all a work in progress for sure, but yeah, I think that's at the core, right? Is who is most affected? They should have the most say. So thank you for raising that. And speaking of most affected, I'm wondering, Terri, if you can tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing and hearing in your advocacy work around the state with housing in Michigan.
I have seen more than my fair share of the struggles being the agency time complaints and the availability of housing stock, which I realize that's not something that can be controlled by policy by having housing stock available, but there really isn't choice for a housing choice voucher. And it's hard. I'm seeing a lot of people actually struggling with that and trying to get their housing voucher to actually be utilized and to obtain housing from that. It seems that a lot of it just falls through the cracks on that. And I will say that when I was working as an overnight chaperone at a shelter here in my county, that I got yelled at by one of the guests that was staying there, who was like, "You have no idea how much time I spent at the Hara's office, only to find out that I was supposed to go to Salvation Army instead, and I wasted 3 hours. Terri, you have no idea what it's like to, I could have just gone to Salvation Army and sat in their lobby that whole time to get what I needed, and blah, 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 and it was 4 hours, 3 hours, Terri, 3 hours." And I'm like, I eventually got to the point where I had to put my hand up and go, "Stop." And I was like, 1, you're lucky that you didn't have kids with you. 2, yeah, I know exactly what it's like, and you're forgetting that. And 3, I understand. I can completely sympathize with that struggle, and that it is ridiculous. You shouldn't have been sitting at the Hara. You should have been directed before you got to the Hara to go to the Salvation Army. And I'm not sure how that confusion happened. But, I told him, I said, imagine having to pack the hand busies. I had to pack hand busies to go to the Haras, and then to DHHS, and then to Salvation Army, and then so that my kids had something to do with their hands. Because if you didn't have the hand busies, I had a ADHD child that would go underneath all the chairs and crawl through them and irritate everybody that was sitting in those chairs, and then I'd get complaints about it. So I'd like for there to be a way for agency time to be reduced. I'd also really appreciate it if there was a little bit more trust in revealing the full programs. because just telling me, hey, you've been put on the homeless preference wait list, but you're not telling me what it is. What does that do for me? Hey, we pulled your name and here's your, you're going to get an HCV. Oh, okay, that's great. What is that? How can you explain it? I ended up, when I was in the shelter the last time, which was 6 months ago, almost to the day exactly, 6 months ago, I was educating the staff and the guests, the consumers that were around me on the programs, because I knew about them only because I sat on a committee. So I feel that, educate the consumer, let them know what the whole program is, let them know what other programs are too, because you would be surprised. I know exactly what Sue needs. I also know exactly what Kelly needs. I know exactly what, and I'm just throwing names out there, John and James and Joe. I know what their needs are. I know, oh my gosh, you'd qualify for this program. You would qualify for this program. Call this place. It's not fair to have that information withheld, and that's going to create a lack of trust. Lack of trust brings on a lot of there's no hope in it. So I prefer that there would be education about all the other programs and taken seriously. I would prefer to not be in an agency sitting in a waiting room for 3 hours finding out I needed to just go to a different agency. And I'd like choice in my housing. I would love choice in my housing. Again, realize that it's not going to be a policy that's going to improve it, but I do feel that that's something that not only am I complaining about it, but I know others are. I also know that HCV, when they read it out loud to you, your landlord packet, they don't tell you about, they expect you to read all 45 or 48 pages of your HCV voucher landlord packet. And they don't tell you that the number that's on the front, the awarded amount for a 1-bedroom, is actually has deductions that's on this other page in the packet that you don't. So you're busy looking for a $11.25 rent, when in actuality you should be looking for a rent that's $8.50. Because they didn't tell you about that page. So I feel that that's something that would benefit a lot of people. I think it would create a better solution and better outcomes.
Yeah, thank you, Terri. I think it really goes back to, what we've been talking about before, which is how do you make it possible for people to effectively advocate for themselves? Well, people need information, right? I actually think this is a really good segue, though, into my question for Jim, which is to have Jim, you talk a little bit more about the programs that are out there, such as vouchers, emergency EHVs, source of income protections, and kind of, they help, but obviously they don't, do everything. As Terri has detailed, there are obviously a lot of bumps in the road to using them as well. And so how do we achieve both affordability and choice for people?
Yes, some big challenges there. And I really appreciate and agree with Terri's point. I'm going to push back on one bit that she said about our limited ability to affect policies about housing supply. I think there is some to be done, and certainly more to be done. And I think tragically, Michigan, and sorry to just focus on this for a minute, Alicia, then I'll respond to your question. But if I could just take a minute or two to say, or to let people know, if you don't know already, that Michigan doesn't allocate any of its state general fund dollars to low-income housing development or preservation or even rental assistance, except for some bond financing. All the money the state gets for low-income housing development and rental assistance comes from the federal government. Mm-hmm. And earlier this year, or early part of last year, the state got $6.5 billion in federal COVID relief, ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act, state fiscal recovery funds. And these funds offered a a really remarkable one-time opportunity for Michigan to make a significant investment in low-income affordable housing. $50 million was appropriated to low-income affordable housing. It's a lot of money, but it's less than 1% of that ARPA state recovery fund total. And housing advocates had sought much more. There's also $50 million for so-called missing middle program for more moderate income families, and $50 million for residential clean energy programs. And now we have another opportunity, and that's because it's expected that after it returns to work after the elections, that the state legislature will pass a final supplemental appropriations bill. So there's another opportunity to push for some additional money for affordable housing development and possibly rental assistance and emergency rental assistance, which is going to be a really grave issue because the almost $1 billion in money that the state had under its CERA, its COVID emergency rental assistance funding from the federal government, is running out. The portal closed last week. And so there's real fear there that without that money, evictions will increase. But there's hope for ways to diminish that threat. Our state Supreme Court, I'll add, has been really helpful in adopting some measures that worked in concert with the CERA program and that made the eviction case process more manageable for tenants, including requiring a pretrial hearing in cases and also providing a so-called stay, a delay in the case in cases where a tenant has applied for emergency rental assistance. And the Supreme Court has proposed to make some of those more pandemic-oriented changes permanent. So there's an opportunity there, and maybe I'll mention that in a little bit about how people can submit comments to the Michigan Supreme Court. So yes, and Terri talked about it, this Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is the country's and Michigan's second largest low-income rental housing program. So there are more than 60,000 vouchers in Michigan, not enough. MISHDA administers about half of those. But this program has some really great untapped potential to improve housing and housing choice prospects of its tenant participants that I'm going to talk a bit about, or maybe to use Ms. Butler's language, that we can reimagine housing choice and housing opportunities, especially for Black and brown women, and especially for those of them with kids. I think I don't want to talk about it too much, but the largest housing assistance program in the state is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. So there are around 85,000 tax credit units in Michigan. And this is it's important to know about this program, I think, because it's the federal government's primary program for the development and preservation of low-income rental housing. And most of that is multifamily housing, but it's not a rent subsidy program, and the tax credits on their own aren't enough to create genuinely affordable housing, especially for families with lower incomes, so incomes below 50% of the so-called area median income. And so, what we need is a great deal more investment in affordable housing units. And the tax credit program is what's known as a project-based assistance program, where the assistance is attached to units in a multifamily property. And then when a tenant moves out, the assistance remains behind to benefit the next tenant. So other examples of that are the HUD Public Housing Program, HUD Senior, multifamily housing programs, and a few others. And in most of these programs, the rent is based on income. They have so-called income-based rent. So rents are based on 30% of a household's adjusted income. But the Housing Choice Voucher Program, kind of, it's Terri was saying, is the primary example of a so-called tenant-based rental assistance program. And under these programs, the subsidy goes to a tenant who has to find a landlord, and that's a tremendous challenge, as Terri spoke to, who's willing and able to participate in the program and has a unit that is financially feasible for the tenant, given the limits of the voucher's value. And so the waiting list issues are huge with this program. And when a tenant finally gets, or a prospective tenant finally gets a voucher, it's a huge challenge. I'm kind of repeating what Terri said, to find an affordable and decent unit. And that challenge is only getting more severe for because of some of the issues we've already talked about. And the value of a voucher, its so-called payment standard, is based on an area's HUD fair market rent. And because that fair market rent is below an average rent, most tenants have to pay more than 30% of their adjusted income towards their rent. So they have to make up the difference between the actual lease rent and what they get in the form of a subsidy payment. And so probably most voucher tenants don't even have affordable housing. So it's really good that HUD for this fiscal year 2023, which began earlier this month, has redone the formula for determining these fair market rents. And so the fair market rents have increased about 10%, really at least 10% and more in some places. So today a voucher is worth at least 10% more than it was last month. So that's really going to help in terms of housing search and the prospects for success for voucher holders. But besides the limited value of a voucher, there are a lot of other obstacles that families face to renting up with their vouchers, and especially on their ability to use their vouchers to rent a unit in an area of their choice, including so-called high opportunity areas. And these are areas that are marked by low poverty rates with access to good jobs and high performing schools. Another major obstacle, and I think Terri touched on this a bit, is landlord resistance to accepting vouchers. And that's oftentimes because of a lot of myths and stigma about vouchers, like, oh, voucher holders are too risky and they're not responsible. And that's so often untrue. And many landlords say they avoid or don't want to participate in the program because they don't want to have to deal with what they see as the government red tape, despite getting a guaranteed monthly subsidy payment. And then also landlords use so-called minimum monthly income requirements. So they're not counting the monetary value of the voucher as income as a way to further deny housing to voucher holders. And then another big impediment to voucher holder success is that they don't, and Terri has talked about this, don't always have the tools they need to successfully navigate this very difficult housing market. But there are ways to deal with these obstacles. And so about landlord resistance and refusal to participate in the program, there's a stick of sorts, and Alicia referred to it, and then some carrots as well. And so our state fair housing law could be amended to prohibit discrimination based on so-called source of income, SOI. And that would include the value of a voucher, meaning that landlords would have to count a voucher as income for purposes of their minimum income requirements. And it would be a lot harder for them to just categorically refuse to participate in the voucher program. Mm-hmm. And there are bills pending in the state legislature that would make this change. There's a coalition of people and organizations working to get movement on these bills. Many cities in Michigan already have source of income protections, as do many states in the US, and we can do it here. The carrots for landlords are incentives to participate in the program, such as an additional payment for entering into a voucher tenancy, kind of like a signing bonus. Another is a damages reimbursement fund for landlords to tap into. And these are common features of what are known as housing mobility programs. And they've been successful in many places around the US. Michigan has adopted some of these incentives for its voucher program. But again, another necessary feature of these mobility programs is resources for tenants, including assistance in education about getting and keeping housing with a voucher. And then finally, another mandatory feature of a commitment to improving the Housing Choice Voucher Program's success and to creating genuine housing choice for tenants in the program is what are called small area FMRs, fair market rents, SAFMRs. And so standard fair market rents are determined at the metropolitan or county level, despite the rents within those areas varying significantly. And as their name suggests, these small area FMRs reflect units within smaller areas in these larger areas, and it's zip code areas that are used. And just as I think a really pretty compelling example, in the Detroit metropolitan statistical area, which covers the 5 counties around Detroit, the standard FMR for a 2-bedroom unit is $1,213. And that's very helpfully up from the $1,063 it was last month. But in some low poverty, high opportunity areas in the Detroit metropolitan statistical area, the SAFMR is $1,820. So that means that a voucher used in one of those small areas, if the housing agency adopted these SAFMRs, would be worth more than $600 than the one based on the standard FMR. So that's a 50% plus increase. And so using SAFMRs along with these other tools, source of income, discrimination, prohibitions, and housing mobility programs would substantially lift the possibility of voucher holders renting in their neighborhoods of choice, including high opportunity areas. And so really policymakers in Michigan at all levels need to seriously consider the choice possibility and potential of this voucher program, that there are ways to improve the program and make it better for the families participating in the program.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I think that's so important. Sometimes people are like, well, it's not working. Let's just start over, right? Let's throw it all away. And right, there are very much, we do know how to make things better, but it's often in the implementation, right? And in the details of this, which I think is what I would like, Ruth, for you to talk a little bit more about, right? Is Jim has outlined all these different policies that can help solve some of the challenges that Terri lifted up, but how do we actually implement a lot of these policies that treat people with dignity and respect and give them the information they need so they can advocate for themselves and include their input because they're the people most affected by these decisions?
Well, I want to talk about implementation of public policies or changes in public policy, looking both upstream and downstream. So going back to what Terri said about program design, service delivery, forms, agency time, those are opportunities for community stakeholders to advocate for changes. Those are policy changes too, that if we don't value community members' time and expertise, you have what Terri explained and described she's experienced and other people have experienced. And that was even true with the COVID-19 emergency rental assistance. It got better as we went on. Federal guidelines, U.S. Treasury guidelines changed, but the forms and uploading documents, and these are people in crisis. But even the crisis has been around for 20, 30, 40 years, so it's not like an emergency. The situation was not an emergency. The pandemic exacerbated the existing housing crisis in Detroit. But I would say, again, it's about education, engagement, funding. And part of funding is funding those who are involved in providing the grassroots supports and services, those organizations, whether they're faith-based or community-based, because I found that for emergency rental assistance, people found out from their pastor, their priest, their imam, their neighbor, their barber. And we don't think of those people should be compensated, but I do. I think it's monitoring and reporting. But going back into what I call the natural information network, how information is shared is very different on the neighborhood or grassroots level. There are people who are natural ambassadors or navigators or organizations who do that. We need to support and provide resources for the people who are really doing the helping, who are actually conveying the information, who are actually assisting people at their point of need. And I think sometimes when we think about public policy implementation, we don't always think about the full breadth of what is needed. It's not just, and it is sometimes a fight to pass something, but it's also a fight, and that's true even with the Detroit Right to Counsel ordinance, to get it funded and implemented. But also they're going to create an office of eviction prevention. Community stakeholders should be involved with how that office is set up, because it could be so critical to the success of the ordinance. I could say more, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. And thank you for really giving us that expansive view. I think that's so important because I think oftentimes for folks who work on the more legislative side like me, we're like, okay, we did it, but we didn't do it right, because all the success is compounding on itself in all these different ways that things get passed and actually reach people and how people experience the programs on the ground. So I've heard that we have lots of questions for all of you on this panel. So I'm actually going to flip it over to Laura to see how many we can get through in our remaining time.
Hey, thanks, Alicia. And thanks to our panelists who, I don't know if you're able to see the comments from our audience, but people are really appreciative of your time today and your expertise and your wisdom. So thanks again for being part of this. I am going to start with some questions. Some of these came in via text, but I would encourage folks to continue, if you do have questions, to continue to email us. This first question is, what local policies such as zoning, ordinances, taxes disincentivize the creation of affordable housing? So what sorts of policies are being put in place that are making it harder to create affordable housing? And I'll leave it up to you. And as I told Alicia, she too is an expert and is well steeped in this field. So, Alicia, feel free to respond to if you care to.
I do know that in my county, and I'm so sorry, I just want to take 2 seconds. I know in my county, they're making it so that you can't get new property without having it be at least 2 acres, and that you need to build a 2,500 square foot house on those 2 acres and nothing else. So I'm just putting that out there. That's definitely making it so affordable housing doesn't happen in just the county I'm living in.
I would add about, first, we need to understand what is truly affordable housing. And I think Jim talked about fair market rent, but I also want to talk about average median income, which is the same or similar principle. So HUD, U.S. Department of Health and Urban Development, looks at the metropolitan statistical area. So for Detroit, it is a 5-county radius, area, I should say. And what many in Detroit are looking for is a Detroit average median income. Because if you look at the area that covers everything from Warren to Dearborn to Livonia, it's about $64,000, $65,000 for a certain size household. But if you look in the city of Detroit, we're not even saying on the census tract level, it's probably half that, about 28 to 30,000. So when we talk about affordability, it isn't affordable if we're using the metropolitan statistical area AMI rather than a Detroit AMI. So I think that is one thing. I'm very proud to say that the Detroit City Council adopted a non-binding, non-enforceable resolution to use a Detroit AMI, at least to the extent where there are local funds. We know if it's federal state, they're still going to use the metropolitan. But with that, we can also incentivize both for naturally occurring as well as regulated, quote unquote, affordable housing to serve the low and extremely low. So, 50% of the current AMI, 30% of the AMI. And, in Detroit, we need all kinds of housing. But when we talk about public investments, we should incentivize, prioritize the creation of truly affordable housing for those who most need it.
Yeah, I could go on for a long time talking about this one. One example is just the whole concept of single family zoning. And so policies that are resistant to the development of multifamily housing in communities. And if you just look at the siting of federally assisted multifamily housing developments, you see that they are concentrated in low income areas. And there's some benefit to that they can be a way to improve those neighborhoods, contribute to economic development in those neighborhoods, but they really diminish, if not almost eliminate, the choice of families to relocate to those high opportunity areas. I talked about the low income housing tax credit program. Mm-hmm. If you see a chart of where they are located, it's in those neighborhoods. Very few of them are located in high opportunity neighborhoods. And just the design of the program works against that it doesn't create the incentives for developers, the bonuses, so-called, it's a competitive process. So they're not getting points and they should get a lot of points, bonuses for locating in other areas. And so we just have this really distorted sighting of where our affordable housing is. It's concentrated in low income areas. So we just need to have a more balanced housing policy where when it comes to where multifamily housing properties are located.
If I may just add, although the question talks about local policies, just based upon what Jim said regarding LIHTC, low income tax housing tax credits, the MISHDA is actually doing another round of public comment and meetings to get public comment and input on its QAP, Qualified Allocation Plan, as well as on a racial impact plan. So I would encourage you to go to CDAM or to MISHDA and get information, because we can right now influence and advocate for changes in LIHTC guidelines and the statewide housing plan that was recently released. So the time is now.
And just if I could really super quickly, on that. So yes, in its QAP for the tax credit program, MISHDA recognizes high opportunity areas, but a characteristic of them doesn't include there being low poverty areas. And that's an essential, characteristic of a high opportunity area, that these are low poverty areas. So that's just an example of change that we can advocate for. Thanks, Ruth.
That's great. Anyone else want to weigh in on this one, or did we cover that? Okay. Ruth, I'm glad you brought up, and this is another question we got from our audience. How do we define affordable housing? And I think that, being grounded in that understanding is really helpful. The next question that we got is a little bit technical, so I apologize in advance if this is not one that, it's not one I could answer, but is the land value tax or split rate tax a solution for encouraging affordable development? And if so, why is it not widely used by Michigan municipalities?
I will take a stab at it.
Okay,
CDAD, the organization I work for, is interested in providing more community education and engagement on that. There's currently discussion amongst Detroit stakeholders and policymakers about, basically it would split the tax rate for the structure versus the land. So what that would do is whatever the value of the land is that, but then looking at, so if you want to do a high rise or you want to do the McMansion or whatever, looking at the value of that. But that also ties into some other ways that we can evaluate and incentivize land use and building or preserving housing. That could be community land trust, where again, you separate the land from the housing and use of that housing. Why it's not widely used in Michigan municipalities? I think part of it is inertia. There's been a way that people who have been in positions to make decisions see property as a market-driven private interest rather than a community good or a common good, that through our various property laws, people have certain rights and responsibilities. So I think it's really grounded in how we view property, the use of property, and how that benefits or burdens individuals and communities.
Thanks, Ruth. Anyone else want to weigh in on this? Okay. The next question is, I'll read you. I can't put the full question up on the screen. It's a little bit longer, but obviously a critical one. So this person says, greetings from downtown Detroit. I moved 8 times in 2022 due to low housing and rental stock, only to be met with acute predatory and systemic racist practices. Despite having a 750 plus credit score, a white male cosigner, a U of M Ann Arbor student with a verified address, proof of funds, provided current passport and driver's license photo ID. So this is kind of a 2-part question. Who can I report my experiences to? And also, how do I help protect those with less education about the industry and offer solutions to how people can protect themselves from predatory and systemic racism. And I would also just like to say, if any of you can weigh in on, where this is seen, and we know it's an issue. We know that source of income protections is one way that we can alleviate this, but maybe speak to some other policies in regards to this. So first, starting with the specific question, who can we report this to, and how can we advocate for others to protect them from this?
Unless Jim, you want to say something, I would say in almost every county in Michigan, there is a legal services organization. In Detroit, we have several, but the ones who focus on housing related things, among other things, is United Community Housing Coalition, Michigan Legal Services, which of course isn't just Detroit, Lakeshore Legal Services, which is Southeast Michigan. You can Google those, you can call them if you can find the number, because it's hard to know in this question what this person has experienced and what they want to report. But it sounds like if they're putting this question up, something happened and it was some bad. So I would say reporting is one thing, getting legal advice and understanding what can be done, both on the individual as well as on a policy level. But it sounds like if someone has moved 8 times in a short period of time, they also need housing assistance, which United Community Housing Coalition does, and some other organizations. But I would say start with a legal services organization, a nonprofit that could help you understand the legal protections, how to report things. If we also have a Fair Housing Center, a Metropolitan Detroit. So if there were instances of discrimination, they can help with that. So there's a variety of service providers, whether legal services or housing relocation help. But it goes back to the question and comments we made before. There's not sufficient supply of good, safe, affordable, and accessible housing in Detroit, Metro Detroit, and the state.
And I totally agree with Ruth. I would add to that, your elected officials. So in Detroit, your city council representative, your state representative and state senator. I have to say it's remarkable to me how many legislators do understand, but how many of our elected state legislators do not appreciate or understand the gravity and depth of our affordable housing crisis. And so I think they need to hear more about it. So whether you live in a city or a rural location, as I said, that the lack of affordable or the affordable housing crisis used to be more acute in our cities, and it still is, but there's no part of the state that is immune to the affordable housing crisis now. And so your elected officials need to hear that, of the challenges that it presents to you, to family members, to friends, that this is not an abstraction, that this is a deep reality for too many people. And increasingly, moderate income people are struggling to get and keep affordable housing. So, we're just not talking about, that's where it's most severe, certainly at the lowest income sectors, but it's not confined to them anymore. So they do truly, I think, need to hear more about that.
I would like to just say one thing to this person. You rock for using your voice, for complaining. And as an advocate, I've been told by my state senator that I have apparently a dossier that, don't tell Terri no is common knowledge in Lansing among all the senators, state senators, and state representatives. So just be loud, squeaky. Don't shut up. Keep moving forward. Remember to push it through. Eventually you will get answers. You will.
And you're not alone.
Amen.
In Detroit, there is a tenant association and there are tenant organizers. So you are not alone. And if you provide your contact information, I may be able to help connect you to some resources and some fellow advocates.
All right, thank you so much. I feel like Jim sort of provided, and so did Terri, a little bit of a segue to this next question, which is how do we bridge the gap between policymakers and advocates and people who are not engaged in that work every day? So I think what this person is asking, and particularly those who help community members navigate resources and find support. So I'm thinking we've got possibly like 3 different categories of helpers here: lawmakers, advocates, and then, hands-on navigators. So Terri, I saw you get excited, and I know this is something you help folks do. So why don't you start, and we'll see if others have some input as well.
So somebody hired me to be a peer at one point, which that's on them. I'm not going to say that it was, a bad thing. It was an extremely good thing. And I know that with every opportunity that I had with each one of the people I was being a peer for amongst, that I suggested, do you want to come with me? Did you hear about this? Do you want to know more about that? And eventually, at some point, that fishing reel and your bait does end up getting eaten, and you can just reel them in, and suddenly they find out that they have a voice and can say something, and that it's not and that people are not going to be upset that you spoke for yourself. Please don't ever think that people are going to be upset that your opinion is different, or that your idea has some precedence, and that it's going to screw over somebody else, or what, excuse my French, but whatever it might be. Just speak, invite and speak, invite, speak, educate, all the time, every time.
Anyone else on this? Yeah, go ahead.
I would just add, in addition to what Terri said, a very basic thing is bridge the gap. Just do whatever you know. Start with what you know to do, and then do it. But there may be other people who have different experiences or more experience. Try to locate folks. And part of it is just talking about, I'm looking to bridge the gap between this and this on this subject. And just keep talking to people, and people are like, oh, I know somebody. My cousin's best friend's cousin from college works in that area. So part of it is just the speaking, the talking, the communicating, the asking. But I would also add, you don't have to keep hitting your head against a brick wall or just throwing your fishing line into the ocean and hope you catch something. To the extent that there are organizations like the Michigan League for Public Policy, as well as throughout the state, that can help you bridge that gap. And some of our policymakers, if you call Rashida Tlaib about your street light, she's going to help you, because that's how she's trained her office. Not all policymakers are like that, but many policymakers will help you figure out, is that road a city road, a county road, or a state road? Sometimes it's not easy to figure out who's the best target and what is the best ask. But I would implore you to ask, to talk, to seek, do whatever you need to do with whatever knowledge and opportunities you have.
Yeah, and just really quickly, there's some great, I mentioned them early, national resources. The National Low Income Housing Coalition has a lot of great resources on its website, and ways to connect with other tenants to make your voice louder and more well-informed too about issues, as well as local organizations. A lot of them out there could spend some time listing them by.
Great. And before I kick it back to Alicia, I just want to add, I know Jim and Ruth and others have provided some great resources. If you emailed me specifically, I'll try to connect you with the right people, and we will make sure to get those links in the comments. So thanks to all who brought those questions to us. Alicia?
All right, so we're coming to the end of our panel. So thank you all for like a really energizing, inspiring conversation. So as we close, what call to action do you have for our audience? What is one thing that they could do to help strengthen Michigan communities and help further affordable housing in their local communities?
I would like to just start out that part of the improving and everything, like the keynote speaker had mentioned how there's always, it creates winners and it creates losers. When somebody's getting down and out, just lifting up is the best thing, and reducing, using your ears instead of your mouth to solve the problem really helps so much in resolving issues.
I would say call to action first is grounded in reminding yourself every single day that you are powerful, you are strong, and you are an effective advocate. And do whatever you need to do to become stronger, more powerful, and more effective. But I'm going to challenge everybody here with a call to action. Literally call a local, state, or federal policymaker today or tomorrow and just mention your name. If you don't want to give me your last name, just your first name. And then something that you are jazzed about, that you want them to know that you're jazzed about and want them to work on it. So if you can't think of anything, we've talked about a lot of different issues, and I believe Jim will have more specific. But even if you go to the league's website or pick up some of the materials, they have budget priorities, they have policy priorities, but most of us know without being told what we want and why we want it. So I'm challenging each and every one of you, call a policymaker today or tomorrow. You may say their offices will be closed. I don't care. Leave a voicemail. But that is my challenge to you today.
So yeah, sure. I will offer some immediate concrete possibilities. So one thing I mentioned is the possibility of the Michigan legislature enacting some kind of supplemental appropriations bill after they reconvene after the election. So contact your state legislator, your rep and senator, and even the governor's office to urge them to include some money in that supplemental appropriations bill for low-income affordable housing development or rental assistance. I mentioned also the Michigan Supreme Court, which has done some great things to manage eviction court cases during the pandemic. It has proposed to make some of those changes permanent by amending the court rule that governs eviction cases. So I think that Laura's maybe going to drop some links in the chat, but consider commenting and urging the court to make those changes permanent, that they have benefited tenants, that tenants, not surprisingly, I think, as you know, in the balance of power, don't have much of that power. So there needs to be a better balancing of it. There are these source of income discrimination bills that would prohibit discrimination based on source of income. So urge your state legislatures to support and push for a committee hearing and vote on those bills. And there are a number of other examples of bills out there. One is Senate Bill 949 that the League has been involved in, and that would seal some eviction court case records. So eviction court case records, even in cases where a judgment isn't entered against a tenant, the mere fact that an eviction court case has been filed can be a huge impediment to people securing rental housing. So this bill would provide some protection of another type for tenants. So yeah, reach out to legislatures, let them know that you're concerned about these issues and that you want to see some action on them.
On the City of Detroit level, I'd be remiss to not mention, visit the Community Development Advocate of Detroit's website. It is in the process of being redesigned, but you can go to CDAD-online.org. You can sign up for our twice a month policy updates, our monthly newsletter. You can connect to other people who are working towards similar things on the local, state, or federal level. And again, whether you're a tenant, a landlord, a staff of a nonprofit, you work in the faith-based arena, you are powerful. You just may not know how to fully utilize it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope everyone feels a little more empowered and educated and like they can really step into that power to make a difference. And I'm going to turn it back to Karen for the rest of the program. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. Much gratitude.
Thank you.
Yes, I want to add my thanks to all of the panelists for giving us a strong sense of how Michigan's strength comes from